Everybody. So today I wanted to try to do a puzzle. I'm not sure really how well this is gonna work out for me. But I wanted to record my progress as I did this puzzle. I bought this at Books A Million. It's called Clue Mystery Jigsaw Puzzle. The front does not look like what the puzzle is supposed to look like at all. There is a book on the inside that I will read, so if you don't want any spoilers, then don't watch this video. But it tells you on the back to read the book, assemble the puzzle, and then solve the mystery of who killed the person. I'm not sure who actually died, but we're gonna figure it out together. So let's get into it. Alright guys, this might have to be a two-parter. I didn't realize how long this book was. So I might make a first video reading the book, and then I will solve the puzzle and post that afterwards. So if you are interested in this, give me a like, comment. I like doing mystery stuff like this, so I will probably try to do a lot more stuff like this, mystery puzzles, mystery diamond paintings, stuff like that. But I'm going to read the book for you guys. Alright, it says Clue Murder Mystery, a bepuzzled mystery story by Bruce Whitehill. I knew soon after my arrival at Tudor Mansion that this is not going to be easy. There has been trouble here before, but this time someone used the word murder. The problem is there is no body. Well, at least nobody has found one yet. The call came in around 9:40 p.m. It is the first time I have gotten an evening call since I was promoted to the position of detective inspector late last year, making me the first woman in the district ever to hold that post. I am still dressed in my uniform when I receive the phone call from dispatch, so I am able to leave quickly and arrive at the mansion shortly before 10. It is a cold winter's night and snow has been falling for hours. The dispatch operator said the call was from someone with a nondescript voice who could have been male or female, who identified herself or himself as Mrs. White, the housekeeper. But I know Mrs. White went missing in 2016. The elderly woman, stripped of her medical license for misconduct, had been a staple of the Black and Body household. The caller said the owner of the mansion, Mr. Body, had disappeared, and he might have been murdered. Then she or he hung up. Mr. Body, a very wealthy man of questionable repute, is said to have acquired his money through equally questionable means, and as he inherited the estate from Mr. Black, whose death others describe as unexpected rather than unfortunate, he now has the property in which to show off his wealth. Mr. Body liked to surround himself regularly with people of the same ilk. Irrespective of financial standing, and these small gatherings have become a regular affair. With this assemblage of rogues, it was not unusual to find one character cheating another at a high-stakes card game in the afternoon, and then having a comfortable dinner with him or her in the evening. As I walk walk up the snow-covered path to the main entrance, I notice that there are no footprints in the snow, other than my own, not even around the building to the extent that I can see, and no impressions of recent footprints that might have been covered up by snow. The excessive floodlights made visual inspection from afar easy. I know that it snowed steadily from around 6:30 p.m. to sometime after 8. I find out later that most of the guests arrived around 7, with Dr. Orchid being the last to arrive at 7:25. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Detective Inspector Maria Lakitra. I did criminology research at the University of Cambridge, got my master's in forensic sciences from the University of Maryland at College Park, and have my doctorate in criminology from Universidad Alva Edison, Mexico. And except for the time I was away at university, I always lived within walking distance of Tudor Mansion. For those of you who never had the privilege of attending one of the parties here, allow me to briefly describe the mansion to you. As I mentioned, Tudor Mansion is owned by John Body, a wealthy eccentric who inherited the place from his equally wealthy and even more eccentric uncle, Mr. Black. There are 9 rooms in Tudor Mansion on the ground floor, starting from the hall where I entered and moving counterclockwise. You will encounter the study, library, billiard room, conservatory, ballroom, kitchen, dining room, and lounge. I would describe the rooms as, shall we say, eclectic. And I know from previous visits to this house that the decor is constantly changing, responding to Mr. Body's sense of trend and fashion. The rooms are along the outer walls of the building. Forming a rectangle around a central staircase that goes down to what some call a cellar and others have christened the Great Hall. There are corridors around every room, which means each room can be experienced in silence and solitude, as no rooms share a wall with another room. The ballroom, where there hasn't been a ball in quite some time, has 4 doors, while the hall, library, billiard room, and dining room have 2. The corner rooms only have 1 door each, but there is a secret passage from the study to the kitchen, and from the conservatory to the lounge. Of course, by now, neither of these secret passages is a secret except to someone who has never been here. In the 1940s, there were great feasts created in the kitchen and served in the dining room next door, and great dances in the ballroom, once the home to well-known big hands of the era. The same could be said of the late 1960s and early 70s, but they were lavish dinners of a different level, and music of a different nature. By the end of the 20th century, the sounds that blasted from the ballroom were everything from rhythm and blues to reggae and rap, with some techno, indie rock, and electro thrown in. Mr. Body liked the occasional big bash, but his monthly gatherings became much quieter affairs. He always had the same group of people over: Miss Josephine Scarlett, Colonel Michael Mustard, Miss Patricia Peacock, Dr. Lillian Orchid, Mr. John Green, and Professor Peter Plum. But the get-togethers had become so subdued that apart from a sumptuous repast and the occasional classical concert, the guests were likely to wander off and do their own thing. I have seen them all before, a few times on social visits and work-related inquiries, except for Dr. Orchid, whom I only met once, a short time ago. As I entered Tudor Mansion through the hall, I noticed an older gentleman bounding up the stairs from the floor below. He approaches me directly and introduces himself as Mr. Green, and asks if I need to be shown around. Strange, I think, since I'm not wearing anything that would indicate I am a peace officer. My gun is in a shoulder holster under my jacket, and my badge is on the underside of the lapel. I love flipping the lapel to reveal my identity, but I recognize him, and I guess he recognizes me. Normally, Mr. Body would show you around, the clean-cut man said, but he seems to have disappeared. Mr. Body, an impish character, had a devious sense of humor, and could have hidden himself as a prank. I mentioned this to Mr. Green. He says, "Not for so long. So if Mr. Body hasn't hidden himself, then someone has hidden him away," I asked Mr. Green when he last saw Mr. Body, to which he replies with an account of all the events of earlier. "I got here before everyone, 'cause I helped Mr. Body out a little. I vacuumed the rug in the dining room, and I prepared the dishes and stuff in the kitchen, and I watered all the plants. And there are a lot of them, almost in every room, including the one on the piano, which has to be done very carefully so as not to drop any water on the wood. But not in the conservatory. I didn't water in there because Dr. Orchid takes care of all those and doesn't like anyone messing with them." Takes a breath, then continues. "Everybody was here by 7:30. We all got together when Mr. Body greeted everyone in the kitchen at 7:45, which in his usual procedure, he pointed out all the gourmet items he himself had prepared in the kitchen, and then each of us took what we wanted, cafeteria style, and we brought our own plates into the dining room. With Miss White gone, it is now self-service." He then corrects himself. "I don't mean the eating is cafeteria style. I mean the buffet style. Like a fancy buffet. The table had a table runner down the middle, flowers, tall candles, cloth, napkins, the works. Mr. Green is a regular guest at Tudor Mansion, according to him that evening. Dinner ran until about 8:40, whereupon the guests dispersed. Everybody went and did their own thing. As Mr. Green put it, I asked again when he last saw Mr. Body, emphasizing last. That was it. At dinner time, but I heard him later. He was playing the piano in the lounge about 8:45. He played maybe 10 minutes. Everybody had left. Just Colonel Mustard and me in the dining room. The doors were open and also in the lounge next door, so you could hear the music. Then I went into the kitchen again to sneak another dessert. You could still hear him playing when you were in the corridors. I asked how he knows it isn't someone else playing the piano. The funeral march. That's what he always plays, you know? The Chopin sonata piece. He's always practicing it. I don't know for what. He'll never be good enough to give a concert. No, it was him all right. We are still standing in the hall. I hang up my overcoat on the large ornate coat rack, taking note of 7 coats on the rack, not including my own. Now, as I listen to Mr. Green, I start walking slowly towards the study to begin my investigation. Well, actually, I began the investigation as soon as I got the phone call. Making a quick check of the files I already had on Mr. Body, and his usual roundup of guests. Take Mr. Green, for example. He used to work as a host in the green room of the theater of the modern stage in a nearby city. He appeared to have a great interest in music, a great interest in magic, but was dismissed when a number of performers' possessions disappeared. Mr. Green walks along with me, so engrossed in his talking. He seems almost unaware we are moving. So then, just before 9 o'clock, I went into the lounge like almost every week before 9 o'clock, when Mr. Body and I would meet to watch our favorite detective show on TV. I found it strange that he called him Mr. Body, but I realized later that everybody referred to him as Mr. Body. But he wasn't there, Mr. Green continues. He didn't show up to watch the program with me. I learned from Mr. Green that Mr. Body invited his small group of friends over about once a month, but Mr. Green had a standing invitation every week, when they would eat together and watch their program. Mr. Green took a deep breath. I started to look for him, he continued. Went through every room twice. No sign of him. He just disappeared. When I asked him, in the form of a statement actually, if he is the one who called the police about the missing man. Mr. Green is silent for the first time since I met him. What makes you say that? He asks. I tell him that dispatch played me a recording of the phone call about the missing Mr. Body. The word used was disappeared. Silence again. Okay, I admit it. It was me. I didn't want to get involved because, well, I have a history. But I knew something was wrong, and I wanted to do the right thing. I was a reverend once, but I did some unreverend-like things. Still, I want to do the right thing when I can. We arrive at the study. I'm afraid Mr. Green will keep talking and following me from room to room. I'm not sure if he's being the helpful ex-reverend, or is the killer hoping to ingratiate himself and throw me off the track. That is, of course, assuming the missing Mr. Body was murdered and is not just off somewhere having fun or making mischief. I'm going to have to leave you, Mr. Green remarks suddenly. Nature calls and the bathroom is downstairs. I'm sure I'll run into you later. With that, he turns and walks down the corridor, and I, relieved, continue into the study. The study is one of the smallest rooms in the huge house, but it has 2 walls of windows overlooking the spacious grounds and wood paneling, with the large oak desk in one corner by the windows. Everything is neat and tidy, but the nearest thing to me is a trap door in one corner, which leads through a secret passage to the kitchen, diagonally opposite on the same floor. We go down into a lower level and through an unadorned tunnel, with no exit except at the other end. I follow the passageway, find nothing, and return. Back in the study, I observe a small safe in the other corner away from the windows. The safe door is slightly ajar. I give a tug and it swings open easily. Inside is some jewelry, not the type to be worn by a man, and an envelope with lots of bills, 20s. There are also some papers scattered about, and considering how carefully everything else is kept, I surmise that they were originally a neat stack and someone had been rifling through. A few of the documents have information about some of the house guests. Then I try the desk drawers. There are only 2, and neither is locked. The deep drawer on the side has files in it. The main drawer has pens, paper clips, chapstick, and a revolver. I examine the gun carefully, very carefully, as it is loaded. I slip on a forensic glove. The idea of lifting a gun up by putting a pencil in the barrel is strictly TV and could actually compromise the integrity of the examination of the weapon. One sniff and I could tell the revolver had not been fired recently. Probably not in a long while. I put everything carefully back in place. With nothing else to grab my attention there, I move on to the next room, the library. I immediately see a book on the small table titled Pflanzen für Kenner, which translates as Plant Guide for Connoisseurs. It is open to a page about poisonous plants. I always found it interesting that the German word for poison is gift. Across the room I see another book, this one in the hands of a man who introduces himself as Professor Plum. I know that Professor Plum was arrested for assault recently. He hit somebody over the head with Tolstoy's War and Peace, which left quite an impression. He tells me he is looking for some information on molecular electronics, which I know to be a branch of electronics in which individual molecules perform the same function as microelectronic devices such as diodes. But that's neither here nor there. The brainy professor has no interest in impressing me, but at the same time he has little interest in providing me with any information that would explain the disappearance of Mr. Body. He says that he is a regular at Mr. Body's monthly soirees, but he spends more time in the library than in the social milieu. Since Mr. Body's monthly soirees Since Mr. Body kept an exclusive collection of rare books, He has not seen his host since dinner time. Having headed to the library directly from the dinner table, he saw only Dr. Orchid walking by. Having concluded my conversation with the professor, I looked around the library for a movable bookshelf, similar to the one in the countless movies, and in a case I worked on recently, but find nothing. Nothing that will lead to another level. Professor Plum is so engrossed in his books that he is unaware that as I leave the room to continue my investigation, in the corridor I hear the clack-clack of pool balls crashing into one another. I enter the billiard room where Mr. Green is challenging himself to a game of billiards. On this meeting, he is not my guide, but my suspect, since there are questions I didn't get a chance to put to him regarding his long relationship with Mr. Body, not just as TV buddies. He tells me of the confidence games he has become involved in under the sway of Mr. Body. Even though he was a reverend at the time, there was a lot of money moving in church circles, and various ways to get hold of some of it. But he has changed, he insisted, after police saved him during the retribution inflicted upon him by a group he had swindled. The conversation soon ends, and before I leave, I check under the billiard table, of course. Soon, I am once again walking the corridors of the large building, listening to the clacking billiards fade away as I approach the conservatory. I hear talking inside. There, I meet Dr. Orchid, who is removing a broken pot from the floor and cleaning up the dirt from a hanging plant that has come crashing to the ground. Pretty heavy plant. The long rope is strong enough, and I didn't tie it well, she says before introducing herself. She doesn't seem to care who I am, but I introduced myself anyway. There was no one else in the room, so I guess she has been talking to herself. I remember what I had read about my self-absorbed doctor. Investigators found it strange when two of Dr. Orchid's university colleagues, both female, died of poisoning, as did one male colleague, said to have been the doctor's boyfriend at the time. I ask her if she speaks German, wondering if she was the one reading the book in the library. My nanny taught me German, she says, Mrs. White. Maybe you've heard of her? I acknowledge that I not only had heard of the unassuming woman with a questionable past, I actually had the opportunity to meet her once, during a previous fracas at the mansion. Dr. Orchid continues. If I am studying something that has key information written in a language I don't know, I'll learn the language. She tells me. When I ask her about her relationship with Mr. Body, she explains a complicated story that ended with her being a ward of state until Mr. Black, the kindly gentleman, as she calls him, officially adopted her. It was Mr. Black who left the estate to Mr. Body, remember? In answer to my next questions, she says that immediately after dinner, she went directly from the dining room to the library, where she saw Professor Plum, and then came to the conservatory, passing by the billiard room, where she noticed Mr. Green in stiff competition against himself. As in the library, I am struck by the door and the floorboards in the corner of the room to the right of the entranceway. Without asking permission of Dr. Orchid, as I feel permission is not necessary, I open the trapdoor and descend into the secret passage that connects the room to the lounge. With no branches in the tunnel, it does not intersect with the other secret passage I inspected earlier, and no body either. A swift trip to the lounge trapdoor and back, and in moments I am once again in the conservatory. I have a quick look at the extraordinary exotic plants, and a cursory glance around the room. Not much else to see of significance to my case. And look more closely unobserved to see if there are any signs of clay on Dr. Orchid's shoes. The material is on the ground in the secret passage, but not in the conservatory. The doctor's shoes appear clean, as are the cuffs on the bottom of her working pants. I then leave the room to head across the corridor to the ballroom, telling Dr. Orchid I will probably talk to her again later. After I am already out the door, I hear her mumble, "Yes, you probably will." In the ballroom, I encounter Miss Peacock. I know that she was fired a month ago while working part-time in a nursing home for failing to discharge her duties. During her tenure there, the number of residents who died was more than usual. Miss Peacock is mentioned in the last will and testament of at least 2 of the victims, but nothing was found to tie the small but proud woman to the seniors' deaths. I also know that Miss Peacock, a widow whose late husband died of unnatural causes, is one of the primary beneficiaries of Mr. Body's will. She has just turned on the stereo and is listening to a Spanish guitar piece. I ask where she was after dinner. She says she has been sitting in the room for some time. Doing what? Just sitting. I ask why she had the music turned on only now, because I didn't want to listen to it earlier. She is visibly annoyed with my questions. I introduce myself, whereupon she says she knows who I am. She has seen me in the house before. In answer to when is the last time she saw Mr. Body, she replies, as the others have so far, at dinner. When I press her about maybe having seen or heard him later on, she retorts, if the last time I saw him was at dinner, then I wouldn't have seen him afterwards, would I? Or heard him. The only one I heard was Miss Scarlet in the kitchen humming. As there is nothing more to be learned from Miss Peacock, and after a cursory examination of the room that reveals nothing, I exit the ballroom. Of the 4 doors available to me, I choose the door closest to the kitchen. Before I enter what others consider the hearth of the home, I hear the continuous scraping sounds of metal against metal, which stops almost only momentarily, leaving just the hum of what sounds like a spinning wheel. Inside the kitchen stands Miss Scarlet, leaning over a grinding wheel where she is sharpening a long kitchen knife. According to records I perused back at the station, Miss Scarlet spent some time in prison, charged with discharging a weapon in public. The victim, who received a superficial gunshot wound, was said to be romantically associated with the hopeful starlet, but as intent could not be proved, assault charges were dropped. I also observed on previous visits that Mr. Body had, shall we say, an exuberant interest in Miss Scarlet, and conspicuously objected to her involvement with Colonel Mustard. As we exchanged introductions, I noticed 2 empty slots and the nearby knife block, one of which would accommodate the knife Miss Scarlet is laboring with. Her response to where she went after dinner is downstairs to the WC, and that I went to the lounge to meet the Colonel. Mr. Green was there, but he left to look for Mr. Body, he said as soon as I arrived. I could believe the WC part, since rumor has it that she is bulimic. She has nothing to add to the story of the missing hose. At this point, I am clueless. She did say, however, that yes, there should be a knife in the other slot of the knife block, and no, she doesn't know where it is. I go over to the refrigerator and, being hungry rather than in search of clues, open the fridge door, which has only one note attached to it with the magnet that reads, "Buy more magnets." Inside the fridge, I discover an apple, not unlike the ones in the bowl on the kitchen counter, but I prefer my apples cold, and on the bottom shelf, there is a wrench. Nothing unusual about it, except for where it is found, just a crusty bit on the end that is clearly rust, not blood. When I ask Miss Scarlet whether the household generally keeps tools in the refrigerator, she responds without cracking a smile that Mr. Green tends to putter around fixing things and is known to be forgetful. She says he has been working on fixing a leak under the sink. I check and find an old lead pipe lying there that has been replaced recently by a shiny new one. I check both pieces, the piece of the pipe lying on the surface and the one that is attached to the system, and find nothing strange, no blood. I open each and every cabinet door. not knowing exactly what I am hoping to find. But I discovered nothing out of the ordinary, unless you want to call the combination of mixed-matched college dorm plates and fine dinerware not very ordinary. In spite of the many drawers and cabinets, there really isn't any place large enough to store a body. Unless you empty out the refrigerator, of course. The most notable thing in the busy room is a door in the floor in one corner that leads to the study. I am aware of the secret passage as I examined it after entering the small study. With nothing else to go on, I bid Miss Scarlet good day and proceed into the dining room next door. Through the entrance is around the corner. I am curious why they never put the dining room entrance directly opposite the kitchen entryway. Once inside, I view the large, long table that fills much of the attractive, well-appointed room, and remember what Mr. Green said about it being the center of various activities. And in this instance, the last place where everybody was together before Mr. Body disappeared. I immediately spot a kitchen knife on the corner of the table. It is, I assume, judging by its size and shape, the knife that is normally housed in the block in the kitchen. I examine it very carefully with my magnifier. Before you imagine me as Sherlock Holmes, let me assure you that I use neither a loupe, though I have one in my laboratory, nor a magnifying glass, both of which are a little bulky to carry around all the time. It is a thick piece of rectangular plastic that fits in my purse or wallet, but gives enough magnification to bring out identifiable markings. There are none on the knife, and even wiping it clean would not have hidden the details. Its use as a murder weapon would have been left behind. I pull out all 10 chairs, 4 on each side and 1 on each end, to see if the seats reveal anything. They don't. But what I find under the table does. It is a very long candle, broken in half, but not into 2 separate pieces, which had rolled between the seats. I pick it up carefully in a handkerchief I carry for such purposes. I put it on the table to retrieve later, and put in my evidence bag I left with my belongings in the hall. After inspecting the room methodically, as I had each of the 7 rooms that preceded it, I count the hall entranceway as a room as well as I go. I go directly across the corridor into the lounge. As soon as I enter, to my surprise, Miss Scarlet, engaged in what I would call silent conversation with Colonel Mustard, an older gentleman with an air of affluence about him, or should I say, an air of affluence. I didn't notice Miss Scarlet passing by the dining room as she went from the kitchen to the lounge, but I was probably under the dining room table at the time. She looks more striking in this comfortable environment than in the cluttered kitchen, and I become aware of her stunning high-heeled shoes, which seem completely out of place in this setting. However, her facial expression when looking at the Colonel is somehow in keeping with the high heels. Colonel Mustard, whom I have also seen before, always looks as though he had just returned from safari. I once found out his tan came from a sun lamp. He had been a big military man, but it is said he used his position to better his own interests more than to safeguard others. When I ask him where he served as a colonel, he reveals that it was a title granted to him after he left the military, and not by the military, a title he acquired similar to that famous chicken guy, as he put it, who served only from 1906 to 1907 when he was a teenager. Colonel Mustard spent more than 2 years in the military, but he was eventually relieved of his duties, I discovered, for alleged questionable activities. Now he is trying to get a job as a security supervisor for a large technology conglomerate. The Colonel, as everybody calls him, tells me he left the dining room to play some pool by himself for a little while. He doesn't mention having heard anyone playing the piano. The lounge is a comfortable room with a television, easy chair with side table, and a large toy chest filled with a few playthings for the younger set. There is a grand piano with a piano stool and bookshelves crammed with everything from dime novels to the latest scientific studies. In a corner is the door to the secret passage that I checked from the conservatory end. I look more closely, and with due respect to any possible housekeeper, I can tell the door has not been opened for some time, certainly not that day. A good part of the room is taken up by the large grand piano. The top is tilted up a couple of inches, and there is a lace doily on it. Then I notice a corner of a piece of paper sticking out of its piano bench, so I lift the top of the bench and retrieve the sheet music that is protruding. It is the Funeral March from Chopin's Sonata No. 2, and it has something written on it in pencil. No reason to keep those discharge papers, just destroy them. I roll it up and slip it into the deep inside pocket of my jacket. Then I wander around the room as I did the other 8 rooms, and I stop to question Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet a bit more. I then ask the 2 to go to the other rooms, round everybody up, and tell all of them to meet in the dining room, where there is enough space for all to be seated at once. When they are all there and seated, I announce to my attentive audience where Mr. Body was killed and with what weapon, and most importantly, I tell them who is responsible for the murder of poor Mr. Body. And that's the end of the story. Next, I will have to put the puzzle together, and we will have to figure out who killed Mr. Body. Tune in next time. Thanks for watching. Bye!